Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
You have, as always, just heard an advert for the Page One notebook, the writer's notebook that we've designed. It's still available. If you just click the link in the bio, you'll be taken to that. But this week, we've got a very special guest.
We do indeed. Peter James was on this week.
The international best-selling author. I think his latest book, Dead at First Sight, has just gone in number one as well.
Yeah.
So
crazy run of number one hits this man has.
Yeah. So he's best known for, I think, the Roy Grace crime novels. I think, has he done 15 of those?
15, I think that's right. Yeah.
Dead at First Sight is the most recent, but he's not just crime. He's done horror. He's done sort of, his book before this one was Absolute Proof, which we discuss in the podcast, which is a sort of Dan Brown thriller, sort of religious based, but as I say, a thriller. And we talk about that and the Roy Grace books, which is really interesting actually, what he has to say about the Roy Grace books, but we'll chat about that after the podcast.
But it's a really fun chat we have with him. He's a really nice guy, and we'll catch up with you guys afterwards at the end.
Yeah, speak to you later.
Always wanted to be a writer right from the age of 7. Mm-hmm. I used to kind of keep a little red notebook by my bedside when I was a kid and put my great thoughts. I think the first thing I ever wrote down was, life is a bowl of custard. It's all right until we fall in. Haven't used that yet in the book, but hey, one day. And I was an obsessive letter writer. I was always writing to my favorite authors. Wrote to Enid Blyton. And I had a monitor. I said I just read 5 Go to Treasure Island, where they'd spent 7 days on this island and none of the kids had gone to the toilet in all that time. And I was very worried. And she wrote a nice letter back saying, well, they had gone. She just left those bits out because she didn't think little boys and girls were interested. And then I never had any confidence as a kid at all. I never ever thought I'd ever be a published author. And I remember when I was about 13 in an English class, and I just struggled to hand in like a 3-page essay, and I picked up a novel, and I thought, how on earth could anybody write 400 pages when I've struggled like for a week to write 3 miserable pages? And then I had one teacher when I was at Charterhouse who kind of just believed in me and encouraged me. And I won the school poetry prize when I was 15, which was to have an interesting impact some years later, because I wanted to go to Oxford to read English. And then the first film school opened up in England, the first film and television school at Ravensbourne. And I never believed I would be able to make a living as a writer. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go into film and television, because at least I can kind of get a kind of paid job there and maybe write in the evenings. And I had written at this point, I'd written 3 novels. I wrote the Great British Novel when I was 19, but luckily I never got published. He got me an agent in New York.
Oh, wow.
And he kind of really liked the first book, but it took about 1.5 years because I'd done all the rounds, got rejected by everybody in England. And I first of all did the round of all literary agents, and then all the publishers, and then a friend of mine read it and said, oh, it's quite American in feel. So I got the Writers and Artists Yearbook and just picked out this entry, a guy called Kurt Helmer in New York, and I sent it to him, and I got this glowing 6-page AML letter back, which you got in those days. This is 1969. And I got really excited, and at that point I'd written a second novel, and I sent that to him. He said, no, let's go back to the first one. Mm-hmm. And I then went out to Canada, and I was trying to do some work on it, but I'd sort of semi-parked it, and I went out to Canada because I came out of film school in 1970. It was impossible to get a job in England in film and television. Mm-hmm. Film business was in its usual state of being down the Kazi. And television, there were only 2 channels.
Yeah, of course.
To join ITV, you had to be born into a union family. It was a closed shop.
Right.
Oh, right.
BBC, you had to sign up to like a 6-year graduate scheme. And I had an uncle in Canada, a brilliant guy, and he just said, "Come out here, it's all happening." So I went out and I got a job with a television station as part of CBC, and it was a daily program for preschool children called Polka Dot Door. And I was the gopher, the lowest human life form on the earth. Literally going for this and going for that. And it was like a puppet show that went out at about 7:45 in the morning. And it was like 6 bad-tempered puppets go for a polka dot hole in a door and do stuff for kids. And I'd been on this show for about 2 months, and the producer came in a panic one day and said, "The writer's sick. He's meant to have brought a script in this morning. He hasn't turned up. There's no script. We don't have a show. I just read your CV. You won your school poetry prize. You write today's show." And they stuck me in a corner with an old IBM Selectric golf ball typewriter, and I wrote this show, and they liked it, and I wrote it for the next year and a half, about 3 days a week.
Brilliant.
And it, apart from the fact that I was 22 years old and making, for me, a fortune, a relative fortune, it taught me the discipline of I had to rock up at night with a script. It wasn't an option. No matter how smashed or drunk I got the night before. There wasn't any delaying it, and that was really my kind of first writing break.
And from that, did you?
I contacted my agent in New York, and I said, "This is great news. I've got this fantastic writing job." And I wrote to him, because in those days that's how you did it. And he wrote back and he said, "You asshole." He said, "You want to be a novelist? And you seriously think you're going to sit down all day and write television scripts? And then you're going to go home in your free time and write a novel?" He said, "Forget it. Go work in a library or in a factory or something. Just do something dumb that's not going to take your brain up."
Uh-huh. And did you listen to that?
I didn't at the time, but then it was like 6 years later, and I'd not written another word of a novel, and I met my then wife-to-be, and she said, "When are you going to write this novel you've always talked about?" And I realized that I'd got suckered from there into the film business, and I'd been making kind of writing and producing film.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an article in the Times, I think it was, that said there was a shortage of spy thrillers. This was about 1970. I'm trying to think that it was 70s, about 75, 76, around about then, 77. Ian Fleming had died. And I thought I could write a spy thriller. So I made it all up. It was a kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek. It wasn't a spoof, but it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. And I wrote this novel called Dead Letter Drop, and to my absolute amazement, I sent it to my agent, Kurt Helmer. Didn't hear back from him. And I waited a month, I waited 2 months, then I phoned and found out he died 4 years earlier.
Oh, God.
How rude.
I'm the only person to be represented by a dead agent.
So what happened with that then?
Then I got another agent, a new agent in England, and to my absolute amazement, he got it published, and it came out in 1981, and to my even bigger amazement, it didn't sell. I think it sold about 1,800 copies, of which about 1,500 went to libraries. And I had a 2-book deal, and I wrote a second one called Atom Bomb Angel, which was a thriller set in the nuclear power industry about I learned a big lesson from this book, because this was, I did a lot of research in the UK about the nuclear power industry, and the basic premise was it was a son of a uranium miner in Namibia. His dad dies of cancer, and his son is angry at the way his dad's been treated. And he decides to come to England and blow up a nuclear power station to avenge his dad's death, right, as he did. And I had some key scenes some key scenes set in Namibia, and I couldn't afford to go there at that time. And so I got it all from libraries, and I met somebody who'd been there and talked to them about it. And I remember the book came out. It got a lot of publicity because it was a hot topic, the whole nuclear back then. And the first interview I did was this female journalist, and she said, so, what was it like in Namibia? And I said, it was hot and a lot of sand. And that was a big moment for me, because I realized right then and there that I just lied to this lady. And not only that, I'd lied to all my readers. And I kind of vowed from that point never again to write anything that I hadn't experienced.
Uh-huh.
And it's a lesson that I tell all kind of budding authors, is you've got to understand and know inside out and backwards any detail that you're writing about. Mm-hmm. Because readers can tell if the author knows or doesn't know their subject.
So I suppose that's very much like the sort of write what you know idea.
Totally.
Which we've spoken to other people about as well. And I think sometimes what they say is, it's not, if you've only worked in an office, you don't need to only write office books, but take what you know from that and put that into your book, because that's the bit that will come across as a credible thing. Yeah,
I completely agree. Around that time, the Atom Bomb Angel came out, and it did just as badly as the previous. And I poured my heart out to a lady called Elizabeth Buchan, who at that time was writing the jacket blurb for Penguin, but she's now become a really successful novelist in her own right. And she said, darling, what on earth are you doing writing spy thrillers? What can you ever know about the world of spies? You're up against people like Jean le Carré, Ted Albright, all these guys. Ian Fleming was. These guys came out of the security service. Mm-hmm. You're never, ever going to have that access. She says, you've got to write about what you know about, and also what you're passionate about, not something you think might sell for money. You've got to, what you really want to write. And just at that time, I'd recently got married, and we got burgled. And a young detective came to the house to take fingerprints. And he saw my first book, Dead Letters Rock, and he said, if you ever want your research help with the police, give me a call. And he was married to a detective. And my then wife and I became friends with them. They invited us to a barbecue at their house one weekend. And there was like a dozen of their friends there, and they were all cops. And there was homicide response, traffic, neighborhood protection, SOCOs. And just talking to these people, I got really excited. I suddenly thought, I had one of those moments, and I thought, for a writer, nobody sees more of human life in a 30-year career than a police officer. Yeah. They see everything, from a domestic fight to a terrible accident to a murder to some terrible, old, sad, lonely old person who's been dead for 4 months and not even her neighbors noticed. Mm-hmm. And when they realized, over the next few years, I started becoming friends with more cops. And when they realized I was genuinely interested in what they did, not decided to get a story I could flog to a newspaper, they started inviting me out on patrol with them and come spend a day at their office. And it got to a point where they phoned me and said, we've got a good crime scene, do you want to come and see it? And so I wrote a successful kind of supernatural thriller called Possession, which was kind of part thriller, part supernatural. And then I started putting more and more police scenes in. And in 1996, I was introduced to a young homicide detective in Brighton called Dave Gaylor. And we just hit it off. And over the next few years, he asked me, we worked together on all the police scenes in my subsequent books. And in 2002, he got promoted to head of major crime for Sussex, basically, the Detective Chief Superintendent. And there was a time when my publishers, Pam Macmillan, asked if I'd ever thought of creating a detective as a central character. So I went to Dave and I said, would you like to be a fictional cop? And he absolutely loved the idea. And from that moment onwards, we've just worked together incredibly closely in terms of planning the books. And we sit down and kind of plan. I get a new moleskin notebook. We have a particular table in the pub that we sit at. And we kind of plan out the book. I then go and write the first 100 pages. He then reads it and tells me how Roy Grace and all the other police characters would really think and act. And over the last 15 books, he's introduced me to police officers around the world. And we've become really close mates. I mean, when I got married again in 2015, he was best man. And he's helped give me that authenticity that for me is so vital.
Yeah, I think that definitely comes across in your books. But and that's an interesting thing. So you plan the books out with him before starting to write them. Do you go to him with an idea and say, what about this, and sort of work it through with him? Or does he sometimes come up and say, well, what about if this happens and Roy can investigate this? Is it very much a collaborative thing, or is it
very much? He'll say, I think we ought to have more of Cleo in the next book, or when I first met Dave back in 1996, it was. I was working on a thriller called Denial, a psychological thriller, and he just said, "Tell me about the book you're writing." So I was about halfway through the book, and I told him. He said, "Hang on a sec. I don't think no detective would have done that. And why is your character doing that? I don't think that would fit his character." I realized something when I talked to Dave that I've subsequently noticed over the years, that unlike the homicide detectives we so often see on television, I think the worst one I've ever seen was David Tennant in Broadchurch, because he was just rude and arrogant to everybody. Whereas actually the good ones are, firstly, they're a unique combination of two completely opposing factors. The first is that they are completely anal, because every major crime is a huge puzzle of hundreds, sometimes thousands of pieces that have to be like painstakingly put together over weeks, months, sometimes even years. But equally, so many major crimes are often solved by this clear blue sky thinking. So the really good detectives have this very rare character trait of both being extremely anal and extremely creative. And Dave has that in spades, and he's got a really creative brain. And, by his own admission, he could never write a book, but he loves coming up with ideas and bouncing them off me, and some work and some don't work. But it is a real collaboration. And, he retired from the force a few years back. He's always refused to charge me a penny. He just loves doing it.
Wow.
I mean, that's amazing, because the Roy Grace books, you've written over 15 books, I think now, is it, that you've had. And I did wonder, how do you manage a series like that where you've got the same person involved in a new crime as it is every book? And how do you come up with new ideas? And is it a case of just going and having a chat about it and seeing what haven't we tried writing about next?
It really varies. On my most recent, Dead at First Sight, that came about. The subject is romance fraud, and with that book, I was approached by Sussex Police, by a senior detective superintendent at Sussex Police, who said to me, "We have a real problem, not just in Sussex, but throughout the UK and the Western world, with internet romance fraud. Basically now everybody has a computer in their home and they have a phone, and it's impossible to police internet fraud in the normal manner. And in Sussex over the last 5 years, the police just been reported £30 million scammed by people who joined online dating agencies and thought they were talking to a real person. But they reckon the figures actually way higher than that, because so many people are embarrassed to report it. And he said, they would be happy to kind of help me. Obviously, they couldn't show me confidential files, but they would show me the figures, and they would give me as much background as I wanted if I would consider writing a novel about that theme to highlight it to help other people. So that's how Dead at First Sight came about. And I've had previously, I wrote Dead Tomorrow, which was about the world of organ trafficking, and that again came about when I was approached by the police to highlight the perils of child trafficking.
Right.
So every now and then there is a sort of direct approach from the police. The Met wanted me to write about super recognizers, which I've written about actually in the past 3 books. I brought them in to kind of raise awareness of those. Yeah. And it was great. I had an email from a fan recently who said that she'd heard about super recognizers from reading Daddy If You Don't, and had done the test, found she was one, and is now her career changed and is working for the Met.
So it sounds like there's been a real kind of collaboration between you and the police, which is quite unusual. We've never spoke to anyone, or I've never heard of anyone who's having that kind of level of kind of back and forth with someone like the police service, which is obviously why you have that kind of authenticity in your books, which is so important in a crime novel. I think it is obvious when you read something and you think that's not what a real cop would do, and doesn't sit right with you. Does
it frustrate you when you mentioned Broadchurch, but I imagine most police shows have a lot of procedural errors.
I shout at the screen, and my wife says, "Does it matter?" And I go, "Yes, it does." I can't watch anything if it's not. I mean, it loses me, because I want to. When I read a book, or if I watch a movie, or I watch television, I want to be entertained, but also I want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if something is so completely wrong, it just loses me.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be something pretty exceptional. I mean, the first Line of Duty I actually thought was really good. That's one of the best shows. The first Happy Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that was brilliant. That really felt authentic to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Line of Duty's sort of got bigger and bigger and bigger in its storyline, and kind of lost that authenticity, I think, as it's gone on.
Yeah, it lost me eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with Bodyguards. I thought Bodyguards sort of began okay, but kind of lost me. But I'd rather watch non-fiction documentaries on. I love just watching the shows with cameras in police cars. And, for me, that's much more real.
And you've done obviously a lot of crime. That's what you're kind of maybe best known for to a lot of people. But you've done a lot of non-crime stories as well. You've done Cold Hill as a horror, and Absolute Proof. Your latest one is more of a Dan Brown type adventure. And is it quite important to you to branch out from crime and to do something to kind of, reset your palette?
Yes, and there are certain stories that I want to write that wouldn't work properly within the framework of a Roy Grace crime novel.
Mm-hmm.
Absolute Proof, which you just mentioned, was a class example. It's a book that I spent 28 years working on.
Mm-hmm.
I had a phone call back in 1989 from an elderly guy saying, "Is that Peter James, the author?" A lot of people said to me, "Why didn't you hang up then and there?" And I said, if I hung up, I wouldn't have written the book. I do believe, as a writer, it's really important to bear in mind that everybody you ever meet in life has got a story.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a story that's actually going to make a book, but I think everyone, if you can mine it out of them, has had something interesting happen to them. And that's one of the things that fascinates me about people. So I never dismiss anybody unless they're clearly a complete nutcase in the first 10 seconds. And this guy sounded sincere. He said, my name's Harry Nixon. I'm a retired academic. I was a bomber pilot in the Second World War. I have been given absolute proof of God's existence, and I've been told you're the man to get taken seriously.
I don't even know what I would say to that phone call if someone said that to me.
Long story short, I mean, I met with the guy, and he really was. I could not dismiss him as a crank. He was extremely sincere. He told me that his wife had recently died of cancer, and before they died, he'd made an agreement with her. He'd go to a medium and try and communicate with her.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd dutifully done this, and instead of his wife coming through, a mail came through. He said he was a representative of God, that God was extremely concerned about the state of the world, and felt that if mankind could have faith in him, reaffirmed it would get us back on an even keel. And he said that the representative of God had given him 3 pieces of information that nobody on earth knew, and that the writer, Peter James, was the man to help him get taken seriously. And that was the starting point. And long story short, I went to see a friend of mine who was at that time Vicar of Brighton. He went on to become Bishop of Reading and then of Monmouth, Dominic Walker. And I said to him, if somebody actually could prove or claim to have absolute proof God existed, and it was credible, what do you think would happen? And he looked at me and he said, I think they'd be murdered. So what would it be? You'd have every different faction, Anglican, Catholic, Judaic, Islamic churches claiming ownership. You'd have communist countries like China not wanting to have power usurping their authority. And that was my light bulb moment. I thought, I've got the makings of great.
No, it is. It's an amazing hook, as they say, for the story. And it's a good book, because I'm just reading that just now, actually. I've not finished it, but it's a definite page turner. And also what comes through, I think, as well, goes back to what you were saying about the Roy Grace novels, is that it's clear that you've put a lot of time in speaking to people or doing research in some way to bring that story to life, and that's why you want to keep reading it, I think, because it's got that that authenticity. And also with a story like that, there is always the thing of, oh, that's interesting, and it gives you the opportunity yourself to go off and research it if you're interested in it as well.
Thank you. I realized that to write the book credibly, I had to understand all the world's major religions. So that's what kind of took me a long time. And I just embarked on, over the next 24 years, talking to anybody of any faith, any academic, I talked to kind of senior Muslim clerics, rabbis, Catholic, Anglican, and many, many atheists as well. Asking them two questions. One, what would it take to convince them that God existed? What, if anything, would it take to convince them God existed? And two, what would be the consequences if God was proven to exist? And the book's been a fascinating journey for me. I learned so much myself. I mean, it's, as you rightly said at the beginning, it's a Dan Brown thriller terrain. It's not a religious polemic at all. I said to write a great thriller, but I do like to make people think in my writing. With that book, I wanted people to really question whether there is a bigger picture or not. With House on Cold Hill, again, that came out of, I lived in a haunted house for 10 years. I mean, seriously haunted house. And I became fascinated. There's no question that the house had at least one serious ghost. For me, the question was, what was it? Was it something, was it an intelligence, or was it just some imprint in the atmosphere? And in The House on Cold Hill and the subsequent stage play, which has been on tour, we did kind of look into that whole kind of subject. And every now and then I got a new standalone which is coming out. I got the sequel to The House on Cold Hill coming out in October this year. And next year I've got a new standalone thriller coming out. Again, which is something that wouldn't have worked within a Roy Grace context.
And when you write these standalones, obviously with the Roy Grace ones, you've got Dave, was it, that you can work through the planning stage with. But how long do you spend? Do you sit down and plan out the book from start to finish in some detail before you start writing it, or do you sort of have an idea of where it's going, or maybe the ending is it there, and work it out as you write it? Which are you? Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. Every writer has a different way. I think Lee Carl just sits down and writes the first sentence and keeps going. Jeffrey Deaver, I think, writes a 300-page outline. I like to plan the kind of key points of the book, key high points. I like to know the ending, even if it may change when I get towards it. I always want to I always liken it to getting in a car. And I wouldn't get in the car and start driving unless I had some idea where I was going. Yeah. Whether it was to my local supermarket or to John O'Groats or something. But I tend to plan about the first 20% of the book in some detail. But then I love it when it takes on a life of its own. Yeah. I do think planning is important. What's equally important is spontaneity. Yeah. And I often say, if I don't surprise myself, I'm not going to surprise my readers. I guess it's that old Raymond Chandler maxim, when I can't think whether to write next, I have a guy come through a door with a gun in his hand. But it's a great analogy, that, because I think that the guy coming through the door with a gun in his hand is that surprise, and it's a surprise that readers love.
Mm-hmm. And as you say, sometimes when you're writing something, the best, for me personally, the story's working if, as you're writing it, something suddenly pops into your head, and you're surprising yourself in the story.
Yeah.
I think if you plan something too much, I find myself almost bored writing it, because I know I'm just putting it down again in a different format, and it's not surprising enough to me. I think, and it comes over as bored writing, I think, when it's on the page. I
completely agree with you. I mean, I remember some years ago I was writing, I think it was maybe my third or fourth Roy Grace novel, and I was out with the police one day, and we were in Brighton, and there's an area of Brighton called The Level where there used to be parked a whole load of kind of hippie camper vans. And I said to this cop, it was an undercover cop, and I said, why are they allowed to stay there? If I parked there for an hour, I'd be ticketed and then towed. Mm-hmm. These guys have been here for weeks. And he said, they're all dealing drugs. We leave them be because we can keep an eye on them. And, I'm gaining a lot of intelligence about who they're talking to, who they're dealing with. And I said, well, what's the kind of typical profile? And I suddenly thought, what's the typical profile of somebody living in that life? Mm-hmm. And with his help, in fact, and a drug dealer he introduced me to in prison, I built up a character called Skunk, who was living in a trailer van, and he just, from nowhere, I was 100 pages into the book at this time, he suddenly became a major character in the story. And I hadn't thought of him in the plan, and that I love that when that happens.
Yeah, and then once you've done your draft, you've done a little bit of the planning, you've written the draft. What's the next step for you? How do you do your redrafting? Do you do it as you go, or do you like to do it in one take and then go back and start again?
Yeah, well, I'm a great believer in Hemingway's maxim of write drunk, edit sober. But quite seriously, my best writing time is in the evening, and I find a stiff drink's a great lubricator. Stiff drink and music, get in the zone. But I read everything the kind of following day, and I'm ruthless on myself. But I usually find if I try to write a minimum of 1,000 words a day. I write that. When I edit it, I find I expand it more than contract it. When I finish the book, I have an immediate tight team of my wife, who had great judgment, Dave Gaylor, my very long-term PA, Linda, who's been with me for many years, a great old friend of mine who's a retired solicitor, who's read every book that I've ever written right from the get-go and kind of made comments. And they read it. And then we get together and go through everyone gives comments. And I trust all their judgments. They all give different input. My wife's great on character. Dave is really good on police stuff. Then I do a revision. And then it goes to my editor and to my agent. And then they will come back with notes. Mm-hmm. And that's probably about a month to 6 weeks after I've finished the first draft. And their notes usually take a couple of weeks. Then it goes to my copy editor, again, who I worked with over a long time, and she'll drive me nuts by wanting cuts and suggestions, and that's usually about another month. And then it goes finally to kind of another stage of copy editor. So it's about 5 months from the time I finish the draft before the book is at page proof state.
Yeah,
it's quite because often writing is thought of as a very solitary thing, and obviously it is when you're actually doing the writing. But around that, for you especially, it sounds like it's a very collaborative process. You've got a lot of input and feedback from people.
Yeah, I think for me the image of the writer in the garret on his own is true. I mean, when I'm writing the book, that's it. It's me and my laptop. Mm. But I do think writing is much more collaborative than people realize, and often people allow. The first stage of collaboratism is the research.
Yes, of course.
when I was writing Dead at First Sight, I had tremendous the collaboration with the police and their fraud prevention unit, with a private detective I was introduced to who specializes in trying to recover money from romance fraud victims. And this is big money. People being defrauded out of 40, 100,000, $250,000.
Wow.
One lady in Sussex, £4 million.
Jeez, that's crazy.
From somebody she thought was a guy online. I've learned you can go to college in Ghana and learn to be an internet scammer.
Really?
So, Accra, one of 11
Wow.
schools, centre of Accra, and learn to be an internet scammer. And listen, by the age of 18, you have 11 Range Rovers, and they are making gazillions.
That's
it's
crazy.
insane.
Yeah.
But so the collaboration for me starts with the research. Then my bit, I suppose, is writing the core plot. And then the collaboration starts again with the whole edit process. And then of course, the collaboration goes on with the whole launch of the book and the marketing and the promotion. I think it's very different to the days of Charles Dickens when he would sit with a quill and send it off, and the publisher would kind of just take it on from there.
And I suppose that also helps with the issue of
doing things like this.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I keep part of being an author today.
And I suppose having a team around you like that is also helpful in the issue we've talked to other folk about, which was when do you know the novel's finished? There's that temptation to keep going back and doing another draft, and having someone say, stop, it's ready now. It must be a good thing.
It is. It's really helpful. And I think things go wrong when you're writing. I had a really interesting conversation at Crime Fest last year. I was standing outside with Martina Cole and Lee Child, and we were just chatting, and I was at about page 45 on Dead at First Sight. And I get to somewhere between about 45 to 60, and I panic. And I think, this book is no good. Got away with it, before the last 20, 30 odd books I've written, but they're finally going to find out. And I said to Lee and to Martina, I said, do you guys ever have any moment of self-doubt? And both of them said exactly the same and about the same point. That they both think, shit, this is not going to be any good. Mm-hmm. And so in a way, by having my sort of team and saying, no, we're enjoying it, keep going. It kind of gives you a reason to keep going.
Yeah. And it must be nice for everyone who's kind of listening to this to know that it's normal to have that fear of, oh crap, this isn't working or this is rubbish. And even big name authors like yourself and Lee Childs, etc., have that still with their books that they're writing now. That's a common thing, which is nice to hear.
Yeah, and that almost every writer I've ever talked to has that same. I think the day you start to cruise, the day you can say, well, actually, I've got my next 3 books already written, so I'm off to watch football. Written rubbish.
Yeah, actually, we spoke to Martin Billingham. He said exactly the same thing, actually. Yeah. If he ever speaks to someone and they say, oh, this book that I'm writing now, it's going easily, it's great, he thinks, that's probably not a good sign.
I completely agree with Mark. I think, I've had that conversation with 1 or 2 authors, and I thought, and their books sort of do disappear. I think you've got to. I remember when I was a kid, some of my favorite authors, big influences on me in my early days, like Alistair MacLean was one, and as he got more and more successful, his books got longer, and less edited, and lazy. And I've always sort of been determined to try to raise the bar with every book and not have a cruise.
Well, that makes it interesting for you as well, I imagine. Giving yourself a challenge with anything in life is always going to make it more interesting than just sort of,
absolutely,
getting something out easily. And you obviously started in the world of film and TV, and then went into novels, but you've also done quite a few stage plays. Your books have sort of been adapted into stage plays as well. How did that come about? And is that, again, a different challenge for you? Do you enjoy that?
I absolutely love it. At the same time as wanting to be a novelist, I always loved the live theatre. And I very much wanted to write a play. I did write a play many years ago, which it got optioned by Robert Fox, who was kind of James and Edward's brother, who's a theatre impresario. And it never happened. And I got approached by Josh Andrews, he's Anthony Andrews' son. And I knew Josh. We worked together a bit in the movie business. And he left the film business to make a career as a play producer. And he worked with Bill Kenwright for a while. And we bumped into each other at a party. It must be about 8 years ago now. And he said, we're making a huge success of Agatha Christie plays. He said, you must be, I'm not quite sure whether it's a compliment or not. He said, you must be the nearest thing to a living Agatha Christie. He said, have you ever thought of having one of your books on the stage? And I said, I would absolutely love to. And we discussed what might work best, and we decided Perfect Murder because it was a five-hander and kind of very concise. So we went out with that, and Perfect Murder, we had first do Les Dennis playing the main role and Claire Goose, and then we went out again with Shane Ritchie, and it was a smash hit both times. And then we put Roy Grace into it, actually, in a minor role. He wasn't in the original book. And then we did Dead Simple, again, big success. And then 2 years ago, Not Dead Enough. And then this year, The House on Cold Hill. And they've all been hugely successful. And I love it because you can't sit and watch somebody reading your book. It's a bit weird. But I love sitting in the back of the theatre watching the audience.
Yeah, that must be amazing. Yeah.
And I've learned so much about what they like and what they don't like. I think one of the biggest revelations I had was sitting in the back watching Dead Simple, and the sudden realization in the audience that the beloved, charming, sweet Ashley is actually a gangster.
Yes.
And you get this, you can feel the ripple of shock, but a joy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that, people actually love a female monster.
And I look at it because obviously Dead Simple, a lot of it is involving a man who's locked in a coffin for quite a large part of the story. And I did wonder, how does that work on stage when, because there's scenes in the book where it's just him by himself.
It was quite funny, actually. It was brilliantly staged. We had Jamie Lomas played Michael in the adaptation, the first adaptation of it. And literally we had a 2-tier stage, and we had a glass-sided coffin. So Jamie was like, the first scene is the van arrives in the woods. Really good. They had the van coming towards the auditorium with headlights, trees, and they lift the coffin out, and they put Michael in the coffin, and then you lower it into the ground so it comes into sight of the whole theatre.
Brilliant.
And then we managed to get the first to about 26 theatre. We got most all the theatres to agree to put all the lights off, even the exit lights, for a couple of seconds. So when we staged the crash, we had the lights coming towards, and Rob's in the van on the walkie-talkie.
Yeah.
And there's a scream and this almighty bang, and the audience just shits themselves. But we were in Woking, and there's this terrible silence, and Jamie's he's got his walkie-talkie, and so he obviously hears the crash, and we're in Woking, and his voice echoes out across the auditorium. He says, "Where am I?" And someone in the audience shouted out, "You're in Woking, mate." Slightly killed the atmosphere.
And have you, obviously you got the stage plays and the novels, have you got, are you wanting to go back to the world of film and TV as well? Or?
Yeah, Roy is, I can't say too much right now, but it's in really advanced development for television.
Oh, wow.
Hopefully we'll be seeing it come to screens next year.
Oh, excellent. That's very cool.
yeah, and they were in Touchwood in really good shape on that.
Brilliant. Is the casting kind of who you had in mind when you first wrote him as a person?
Yes, in terms of certainly the kind of the essence of the character, the key person that they want, I think would portray him brilliantly.
Brilliant. And have you got much involvement in that? Are you doing the scripts?
I have. But it's being produced by somebody who's a mate of mine. We've worked together in the past. So part of the reason it's taken so long is I've been determined that nobody's going to screw it up.
Mm-hmm. No, that's brilliant.
I'm really excited about it now.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. So it sounds like you've got quite a lot in the pipeline, as always. So you've got the standalone that you spoke about, the TV series. Is there another stage play in the pipeline as well? Yeah,
we're going to be adapting Dead at First Sight, which will be coming on stage 2021.
Brilliant.
And Perfect Murder is in development as a miniseries in America as well. So they're not perfect people, my standalone.
Oh, excellent. So it sounds like it's non-stop.
It's great. No, I'm loving it.
Yeah, excellent.
We always like to wrap up every podcast with a sort of either-or quick fire questions of a few things. A real book or an e-book?
Real book. I just love the connection with the author you get the real book. Mm-hmm. If you hold a book, particularly if it's a signed book, it's got that sort of feeling of the author. E-books are great traveling, but a real book is my friend.
Luther or Happy Valley?
Happy Valley.
TV or cinema?
It's a really good question. If you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I'd say cinema. Mm-hmm. But I think TV is taking the edge now.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And actually, that's what everyone says.
Everyone seems to say that, yeah, definitely. And it's because I
still love the shared experience of being in a movie theatre. And if you get a really good comedy, you get that wonderful feeling of laughter, or you get a really good scare, that ripple.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think horror works really well in cinema because you have that shared experience of that everyone jumping together type thing. Yeah.
And last one, eating in or going out?
Do you know, I genuinely like both. I think it's nice to go out, but I think people get very hung up about quality of food. When you go out, I think it's to actually have a nice shared experience with friends.
Yeah.
Rather than sitting there being precious about, this steak's not quite tender enough, and I think we do it slightly better in this case. I think we can get all too. I've written a restaurant column for years, and I believe that restaurants are about camaraderie and friendship more than they're about food.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true.
I think that's definitely true.
Oh, it's another score in the column for TV over cinema.
Yeah, I know. It's funny that I can't remember anyone saying cinema.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is because I prefer the cinema. I think the cinema is getting worse and worse as a place to go.
Yeah,
in terms of talking.
I definitely don't go to the cinema as much as I did before. So, although that could have something to do with having kids, but
it's also become more expensive.
It's more expensive, and there is so much good stuff on TV. Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I will fight for cinema. I'll be the lone voice for cinema on this podcast. That's fine.
But it was a really good chat with Peter, and actually really interesting how the Roy Grace novels came about and how they still come about. It basically sounds like it's a collaborative effort entirely.
I've never heard of someone like a police force being involved that closely, actually giving ideas for a story. That was very interesting.
For his latest one, the police actually contacted him to sort of highlight an issue in a story is good, but also just his friend Dave that just seems to. They just work it out together. They just plan the novel, and then Peter goes and writes it. So, that was unusual. But
yeah, and I thought he also had a lot of really good tips and some really good insight and musings on writing and things like not being worried if you're feeling it's all going to pulp when you're a quarter of the way in, or and his tips on redrafting were really useful.
It's that sort of thing that other people like Mark Billingham and others have said to us that that imposter syndrome. I think everyone gets it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you're reading that draft, it's very easy to think, this just is it's not working.
Yeah.
And if Peter James gets that, there's hope for us all. There's hope for us all. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that. And that episode also marks a slight break in the podcast for us because we've got these notebooks. I don't know if we've spoken about them before.
I've never heard of it. You mentioned a notebook before.
During this little project page one.
Tell me more.
No, so we've got to concentrate on the production for that, and we're also going to line up many more authors to speak to, and writers, screenwriters, etc. So there'll be a few weeks break. We're hoping to come back around sort of August time.
Yeah.
But if you follow us on Twitter or our Facebook page, you'll find us there. We're at @right_gear on Twitter, and Facebook. I think we're right_gear UK. I think.
Yeah,
I think that's right. It's certainly, if you search for Right Gear, you'll see our logo on Facebook.
And as always, you can send us a question or a query to podcast@rightgear.co.uk.
Or if you know any authors that would like to be on, or if you want...
Mr. Stephen King, if you're listening, you're welcome on anytime.
Or if you want to, if you've got any suggestions for people you'd like to hear from, we'd love to hear that, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, hope you have productive writing, if that's why you listen to this podcast.
I want one book from every listener before we start season 2.
Indeed. And as always, we'll leave you with a few words about the Page One Notebook, and we'll speak to you again in August.
See you later.
See you.